Welcome to the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, woodworking with an Appalachian flair.
This is Jerill Vance with the Appalachian Heritage Woodshop, and I want to show you a little exercise that I created for my students to improve their hand-cutting dovetail ability. I developed this when I was teaching woodworking to some prison inmates in the state of Kentucky. It works really good. There are three different steps to this: a beginner woodworker, intermediate woodworker, and an advanced woodworker. So you pick out whichever one you think you are and start there. And there's nothing wrong with doing all three, or starting with the intermediate and doing the intermediate and advanced at the same time. It doesn't matter. This exercise, or these three exercises, will help you hone your dovetail cutting skills by improving 5 different areas. They will ensure that you are able to cut a straight and a square line. Now, I know a lot of you are thinking, well, when dovetails, you cut an angled line. It is true, you cut an angled line, but the line is still straight. From point A to point B has to be straight. If the line is wavy or arced, then your dovetails will not fit together tight. So you have to be able to cut a straight line, and of course that straight line can be on an angle, but it must be straight. And of course square is a big advantage also. So this exercise will help you improve that. It will also reduce your margin of error. Now that sounds kind of odd, but you need every advantage you can when you're hand cutting dovetails. So the best way to explain it is to think like a professional athlete. A professional athlete, a Major League Baseball player, when they are called up on deck, it used to be they would take 2 or 3 bats and they would practice swinging 2 or 3 bats. Well, they've since done away with that, and they've created a device called a donut, which slips over the bat and it weights the end of the bat. So now they have one bat that is heavier on the end than the bat they use during the game, and they practice with the heavy bat. A professional basketball player will practice with leg weights or ankle weights on, so they get used to jumping with extra weight on. So when they take the weights off, they can jump higher, quicker, faster. So in a game time, they're better. A track sprint athlete will practice with a device, a harness with a parachute drag on. So that forces him to lean forward, and it gives him more resistance. So when he takes that off, he has better form and less drag, so he can run faster. So as a woodworker, you need to reduce your margin of error. And the way you do that, whatever is the normal thickness that you use when you cut dovetails, such as 3/4 of an inch, then you practice with 1 inch. If you normally cut dovetails in 1.5 inch thick material, then you practice with 2 inch, okay? So that's the way we'll be doing this. For today, we're going to be using 1/2 inch, and I recommend you start with 1/2 inch and work your way up. Another way this improves your hand-cutting dovetail ability, it familiarizes you with the units of measure that you use. Now, if you use millimeters, then you become more familiar with millimeters. If you use inches, you become more familiar with that. Again, the best way to comprehend this is to think of a mechanic. A mechanic can look at a nut or a bolt and at a very quick glance immediately tell you that's 7/16, or that's 9/16, or that's 13 millimeters. They know, and that's from experience and from use. So as a woodworker, instead of continually relying on a ruler, you need to develop and hone your skill of being able to determine a specific size without a use of measurement. And that helps you in dovetails because it helps you cut them much faster. And if you want to cut them symmetrical or non-symmetrical, it's much easier that way. Another way this helps you improve your dovetail cutting skills is it allows you to see your improvement. These exercises are designed to be done on a regular basis. If you're a professional woodworker or a retired individual and you can go into the shop every day, then you go into the shop, conduct these exercises, which at first will take about 5 to 7 minutes, and after you've done them a few times, it'll take 3 to 5 minutes a day. After about 2 weeks, you can visually see your difference because you will have a history, you will have a record to look back on. You'll be able to look at what you cut on day 1, 2, or 3 and compare that to what you cut on day 10, 11, or 12, and you can visually see the difference. Another way this helps you in cutting your dovetails, it allows you to set a PR. That is a personal record. Most athletes, whatever their sport, they have a personal record. So instead of continually trying to beat the other athlete, they're pushing themselves to be better than they were the last time they competed. So as a woodworker, you need to think of it the same way. Don't compare your dovetails to a video. Don't compare your dovetails to a magazine. Don't compare your dovetails to the neighbor down the road. Compare your dovetails to your previous dovetails. Always improving. And if you're always improving, always challenging yourself, then you'll see the improvement. And I've come up with a way of being able to measure that so it is not subjective. It is a way of measuring it and being able to say, this is my personal record, and then you continually try to beat that. So those are the 5 ways that you'll be able to improve your hand-cutting dovetails by doing these exercises. Again, there's 3 exercises, one for the beginner, one for the intermediate, and one for the advanced, okay? So now let's look at each one individually. Okay, you just saw the beginner woodworking exercise. Now I'm going to show you the intermediate. Now for the intermediate, you do not use a pencil, a square, a marking device, a measuring device. You don't use any of that. What you're going to use is your eye and your hand. You want to improve your eye-hand coordination, and you want to be able to get to where you can set a specific distance without measuring it. So again, start with a fairly thin piece of wood. Here is a piece of cherry that's about 1/2 inch thick. Please stay away from soft wood. You want a hard wood, preferably one that's closed grain, and preferably one that is straight grain. If you dimension it, make sure that it is the edges are square. Go ahead and cut it long enough so that you can use the exact same board for 2 or 3 or 4 weeks, ever how you're going to do this exercise. So that means the board should be about 2 to 3 foot long. And as you can see, the one I have here is not very wide. Okay, so for this exercise, what we're going to do is you're going to visually determine where the center of this board is. Once you decide that, you're going to cut a straight and square line right in the center of the board, okay? Now, I should say that before you start cutting, what you want to do is determine ahead of time what unit of measurement you're going to attempt to cut. So let's just start with, say, 3/4 of an inch. So with 3/4 of an inch, I'm going to cut down 3/4 of an inch. Again, no measuring, no marking, just doing this by eye. So I'm going to cut down 3/4 of an inch and stop. And obviously, I want this to be straight and square. Now, once I've done that, now I'm going to go to the right section. Now you can see I've divided the board into 2 sections. The right section, I'm going to go to that, and I'm going to find the center line and make a cut. And again, I'm going to cut down 3/4 of an inch. Then come over to the other side, find the center line, and do the same thing. Now I've divided it into 4 sections. So now I'll take each one of those sections and I find the center of that. And again, I cut down 3/4 of an inch. Now instead of doing these others, just to show you, now I'm going to go to that and find the center of that section and make a cut. And again, I want to go down 3/4 of an inch. Now you can see I'm left with something that is about 1/8 of an inch, maybe 3/16. And I'm going to split that in half and go straight down, square, 3/4 of an inch. Now you do this all the way across the board, okay? Now let's look at it. Now you need to understand the camera is looking at the back of the board and I'm on the front of the board. And when you cut dovetails, you need to know which is the front and the back. And the front is always the side that shows. So here you've seen a little bit of tear out from the saw. So for the camera's sake, I'm going to remove that. Now what I'm going to do, just again, so the camera can see this, draw a square line right there. Now you need to look at it and remember, if you are challenging yourself, then you will be your worst critic. You need to be very honest and very critical and look for opportunities to improve. Now this is the back side. Now you can see here I went slightly below, here is slightly above, that one's right on it, that one's pretty good, that one's pretty good, and that one's pretty good. So 2 of those are off. So now, just being curious, those are about 1 inch deep, and I was trying for 3/4. So after you do this a while, you'll get to where you're very good at guessing the depth and your width. Your eye is extremely, extremely accurate if it has a reference. If it does not have a reference, then it is easily fooled. That is the whole concept behind trompe l'oeil, fool the eye. So here you have lines that are parallel. And because they are so close together, you have a reference. You can easily see if your lines are out of parallel. And you can also see how narrow that one is right there. So the goal here is to cut all your lines parallel. That means that they will all be straight. If one of them is out of parallel, then it is not straight. And then, of course, you're trying to get it as close as you can and have a small piece left in there. So you do that all across the board. Now, when you're done, you take that out of the vise and you write the date right on there. Cut that off and keep this piece right here with the date on it. Tomorrow when you come in, you do the same thing with this section of the board here. After a couple weeks, you'll have a history of what you've done and you'll see your improvement from day 1 to day 14. Okay? So that is for the intermediate woodworker. Again, I recommend you start with a board that is about a 1/2 inch thick, and whatever thickness you normally use for your dovetails, 3/4 inch wood, then you want to progressively work up to 1 inch and work with a wood 1 inch thick if you're continually using 3/4 inch. If you're using 1.5 inch thick material, then you want to work up to 2 inch and practice with 2 inch. So that way it reduces your margin of error. So that's for the intermediate. So now let's go to the next step, which is to the advanced.